I'm going to go ahead and call the meeting to order. The Board of Electrologists and Body Art Practitioners Electrology Rules Advisory Committee meeting is convening at 9:07 a.m. on July 25th, 2022 at the Health Licensing Office in Salem, Oregon by telephone conference call. I will now call roll. Jamie Bloom. You can raise your hand. Sheila Ahern. Lacey Keeney. Seth Johnstone.
Sammy, they all are muted.
Is there a way to unmute them all? Okay, I just have mute all. Kate Kaufman.
I'm here.
Sabina Knoll.
I'm here.
Nicole Pappas.
I'm here.
Carla Eberly.
She's here. Everything is here.
Nancy Wood. I don't think she's on yet.
That's fine.
And Amy Penkin.
Good morning. I'm here.
Okay, members, when you wish to speak, please state your name, your last name for the record. Members are asked to not use the chat feature during meetings. Public members wishing to speak must sign in on the roster available in the room. For public members calling into the phone line, please email April Fleming at april.fleming@dhs.oha.state.or.us and provide your first and last name. Public and interested parties feedback period may be heard during the public and interested parties feedback period if indicated on the agenda. Everyone is asked to use appropriate language, manners, and protocols when conducting business. This meeting is now called to order. Okay, so first thing on our agenda is introductions. And I'll go ahead and start. I'm Sammy Patnode. I'm the policy analyst for the Health Licensing Office. I've been here 25 years. I have 6 programs under me, including the Board of Electrologists and Body Art Practitioners. And I'll be facilitating the meeting today. So go ahead, Jamie, you can start.
All right, my name's Jamie Bloom. I've been an electrologist for over 40 years. I've been on the board on and off since I moved to Oregon 30 years ago. And I am president of the Oregon Association of Licensed Electrologists. I'm also on the board of the American Electrology Association. I guess that's all I have to say. Good morning, everybody.
Lacey?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Good morning. My name is Lacey Keeney. I am an electrologist here in Oregon. I specialize in transgender pre-surgery and trans needs and PCOS. And I'm in practice out of Eugene, Oregon. So, sorry, hope that's enough.
Yeah. Sheila, you want to go ahead? You're muted, Sheila. You're muted, Sheila.
Sheila Ahern. I'm an electrologist in downtown Portland. I've been practicing about 44 years, and I was on the very first advisory council when we relicensed and served a couple of terms then, and have been a proctor for exams for quite a while. Member of both our national and state associations.
Seth, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Did you say Seth? Hi, everyone.
Yeah.
My name is Seth Johnstone. I use he, him pronouns. I work at Basic Rights Oregon as the Transgender Justice Program Manager.
Kate, you want to go ahead and go? I'm just going down my list.
Sure. Hello, everyone. I'm Kate Kaufman. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the owner of Brave Space, and I am on the Oregon Trans Health Coalition.
Sabina?
Hi, I'm Sabina Knoll. I am a prospective electrology student, and I am particularly interested in helping other queer and trans folks get into electrology.
Carla? You might have lost Carla. I think she was frozen. Amy, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Amy Penkin. I use she and her pronouns. I'm the program manager for the Transgender Health Program at Oregon Health and Science University. Thank you.
And Carla? You're on mute, Carla.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
I'm sorry, I had a very hard time getting connected this morning, even with the help of my wife.
Well, we're glad you made it on.
According to what I'm seeing, even though I use the member link, I don't know why.
You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm sorry.
You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm not getting what you're saying. My sound apparently is not very good.
You want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yes, I can. My name is Carla Eberly. I am semi-retired from being an attorney, and I also have a Doctor of Divinity degree, though I'm not currently preaching anywhere. I have greatly cut back on my activities because of the plague, and have been working from home as a diversity and inclusion consultant. So, and I have been a patient of most of the procedures we're talking about for what that's worth. Though being a patient doesn't make you an expert.
Okay, Heather, you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
I'm sorry, my sound is not very good, and I'm not sure why. Let me see if I can turn my sound up here.
Is there a way to make the music go away? Or is it just stat? Oh, I can just turn it down right here.
So Carla, if you're done, I'll go ahead and introduce myself. My name is Heather Vogelsong. I go by the pronoun she, her. I'm an attorney with the Oregon Department of Justice, and I'm here today. First, wanted to welcome all of you, and I'm here today to do a presentation for you. I think that'll be under number 2 of our agenda. I've been with the department for a while and been advising HLO and various boards and programs for a while as well, but I'm happy to be here today.
And then Cynthia.
My name is Dorothy Murphy. I'm the Qualification Analyst for the Health Licensing Office. I've been with the office for 26 years, and I write education, training,
You're
and
muted.
examinations.
You're muted. You might have to come over here and do it. Or it might have feedback, I don't know.
We were able to hear her, Sammy.
Okay,
Very good, thank you.
okay. We will get going. So I'm just going to quickly go over the agenda. Heather is going to provide us with an overview of how the laws work, how laws intersect with rules, our authorities to do those rules, and then how to be, and then just fiscal impact, and then just the general process of rulemaking. Then we'll have a working lunch. We're going to go over the qualification committee recommendations that met on June 27th, which was very good. Some, at least 3 people, I believe, were on that committee. So it'll be good continuity to keep things going and understanding. And I've got Cynthia here who facilitated that meeting. We'll also, within that, that area, we're going to go over the training program that was reviewed and approved through the qualification committee, and then just talk about supervisors and their requirements and what you expect them to do since it's outside of a school. Ratios, I know that was something that Basic Rights Oregon and the executive summary put on there as ratios between teachers and or supervisors and trainees or students. Next one, we will go, may talk some about other state programs and comparison report, talk about examinations, including the practical, the written, the laws and rules exam. And then at the end, Heather will touch on this a bit. One of the requirements is the Rules Advisory Committee weigh in on the fiscal impact to communities likely to be affected, small businesses, the public, pretty much the whole gamut. And I sent you something that kind of goes over the questions, but I'll definitely walk through those with you and give you some of my thoughts on that since I've done it 1,000 times. Also within that, we'll talk about the racial equity statement, which is new. House Bill 2993 passed in 2021, which requires that we draft a racial equity statement during for the proposed rules to go out through the Secretary of State's office, and Heather will probably also touch on that. Any type of small business owners that maybe I've missed, and then we can do recommendations to the board a couple different ways. If we run into something that we can't get all, just a straw poll agreements on, we could do a single approval of something like, say, curriculum, you want to go to 500 hours instead of 6. And some want to do that and some don't. Or we could just do one lump sum approval at the very end. So we can just kind of play that by ear. I have a motion list and I'll walk through all of that. And then we'll go through the rule schedule timeline. My plan is that this will be the only Rules Advisory Committee that we need if we find that we are not having enough time, which I hope the meeting to end by 1. I think that the qualification committee did a really good job of getting down to the, the nuts and bolts of the curriculum and the training program, so we can do more of a broad stroke. But we can go over it very thoroughly if you want to. So if we have to schedule another meeting, we'll do so, and then we'll just rework the schedule. They're always fluid because we never really know how far we're going to get in racks or those types of things. So without further ado, I will introduce Heather to give her overview. And do you just want to go ahead and share your screen, Heather?
Yes, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Thank you, Sammy. So again, my name is Heather and I work with the Oregon Department of Justice. I'm going to pull up on my screen a PowerPoint presentation to share with you so that we can walk through some of the things around rulemaking so that you'll be aware of that, as well as we'll talk a little bit about the statutes that may come into play here as you're providing input to HLO. So first off, we'll start with the 3 branches of government. As you all are likely aware, there's 3 branches to our government. There's the legislature, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. The legislature is the group that makes the laws, and those are the statutes. The executive branch carries out the laws, and that's where HLO and the board would fall, is carrying out the laws. And then there's the judicial branch, which interprets the laws, and they're each a check on each other. But why that's important to know is because the legislature, who makes the laws, makes the statutes, it is those statutes that you will be working with in rulemaking today and in carrying out the laws by making rules. So what are statutes? Statutes are laws that are created by the legislature. And what's important about that to know is that agencies only have the power that is given to them by statute. So the legislature gets to decide how much power the agencies have, and they do that through the statutes. And there is case law on this, which the courts have interpreted the law and have said that a state agency has no inherent power on its own, but only such power and authority as has been conferred upon it by the organic legislation. And so again, those are the statutes, the ORS books that we'll talk about. So what are rules? And those are the rules, the things that you'll be dealing with today during your RAC. Rules are laws that are created by agencies, and the agency's power to create those rules are grounded, again, in its governing statutes. So as you're going through and doing rulemaking, you'll always want to be guided by the statutes because that's the limit on your authority to do the rules. So there are different acronyms that we use to reference those laws that the legislature creates and the rules that, like what you will be working through today. So the ORS are the Oregon Revised Statute, and those are the statutes the legislature creates. The OAR acronym is the Oregon Administrative Rule, and those are the rules that you will be having input on today. So if you see ORS, know that it's a statute. If you see OAR, know that it is a rule. So when enacting rules, an agency must look at what authority was given by the legislature. And so that's why we're going to go over some of your statutes today, your governing statutes, so that you have an idea of what they require. The agency and SAMI are very attuned to what the statutes are and what they require. So when we look at the statutes, how do we know what the authority is? Well, what the court has told us is that we look at the words in the statutes that govern the agency. And there are certain things that we look for. If we're making a rule, we look to see whether there are exact terms in the statute, whether there are inexact terms, and whether there are delegative terms. And again, this is the court telling us that these are things that we look for. So we're going to do a broad overview of that so you have a sense of what that means. The exact terms are words of precise meaning. So in the statute, there may be words that the legislature uses that we know exactly what they meant. And with those exact terms in rules, we cannot change that. We have to go with what the exact term is and with that precise meaning. So some examples of that are if a statute says you have to be 21 years of age in order to drink, or that you need 30 days in order to contest a matter, or that the location where the rule takes place is Marion County. And so those terms, those terms are exact terms, and we can't change those in rule. We might also see a statute that has inexact terms. And these are terms of less precise meaning that require the agency to interpret them. And the word can have different possible meanings and interpretations. So how do we know what interpretation the legislature meant? Well, we look and decide through a process that we'll talk a little bit about to figure out what the legislature intended. Legislative intent is what governs when we're looking at an interpretation of an inexact term. So an agency may express its determination of which interpretation effectuates the statutory policy, either by rule, or they can do so in a contested case, which is a case that goes through the administrative process. So the court said that when we are looking at a word in the statute that's inexact, you can either or through a contested case. So some examples of an inexact term that you may see in a statute is the word employee, which can have different meanings depending on the statute's the statutory context. weapon can also have a different meaning, whether a knife is considered a weapon, which it most likely is, versus whether a pencil would be considered a weapon, a sharpened pencil. So you can see that a weapon can have different meanings depending on contexts, and that would be where the interpretation lies. And also wildlife is another example of that can mean different things. So in order to determine what the legislature intended in order to carry out that intent through a rule or through the contested case process, the courts have given us a 3-step process to use. And this is a process that is something that the attorney would likely provide advice on. So it's not something we're going to be asking you to do today, but it is something to just know about as to how these statutes are interpreted and just have that general knowledge. So what the courts have said is that when you are trying to figure out what the legislature intended, you look at the text, the exact words that the legislature used, and you look at those words in the context of the statute. What are the words and the sentences that surround the what you're trying to identify is the intent. This step is given the primary weight in the analysis. So we look at those words and we look at the context first and we give it primary weight. We can also look at legislative history to see if when the law was being enacted, whether there was anything stated about the specific phrase or word at issue, so that we can then gain an understanding of what the legislature meant through that history. And if those 2 steps don't give us the intent, if it's still ambiguous, then we can also turn to general maxims of statutory construction to clarify. And there are a bunch of rules out there that tell us attorneys how to interpret a statute when there's ambiguity. So there is an actual method that the courts have set out for us. But again, that's not something that you're going to employ today. The last type of term is a delegative term. Those terms express non-complete legislation in which the agency is given delegated authority to complete. So basically, the legislature has said, hey, here's this thing, and we want to hand it off. We want to hand this thing off to the agency and let the agency do further interpretation on it. And we are giving you authority over that. So an example of that is the word device. It has what the statute says is device has the meaning given that term by the Board of Certified Advanced Aesthetics by rule in collaboration with the Board of Cosmetology. So in that situation, it's very clear that the legislature is saying, go forth, create rules, and determine what the meaning of device is. And so that's an example of where the legislature has given all this authority to the agency in order to set forward that meaning. So even with that, you always have to be within the legislature's intent. And so we would go back to a statutory interpretation, but there's lots of authority there, and it's clear that the agency gets to decide the meaning by rule. So just for an overview, even with delegative terms, those terms that we just talked about, agencies must stay within the intent of the legislature. And so if we bring this down to a little bit of a fun level, what we can say is that perhaps the legislature created in statute a law that says the agency must build an animal and gives the agency statutes where there are the bones of a dog. And so with that in mind, you have the bones of a dog to work with, and you know that you must create an animal. Well, you could create a poodle with those bones. You could create a Doberman Pinscher with those bones, or you could create a St. Bernard with those bones, because those are all bones of a dog. Even though there are different kinds of dogs, they all have the bones of a dog. But what you could not do with those bones of a dog is create a cat, because that would not fit within the intent of the legislature, with it being the bones of a dog. So hopefully that's a nice, clear example of what you can and can't do with delegative terms. Next, we're going to talk about the rulemaking process, just so you have an idea of where your RAC, your meeting today, fits in the overall process. And this is a generalized overview. So rulemaking in Oregon, in a nutshell, you start with a RAC process. And the RAC provides advice to the agency and recommendations. They are the individuals that are likely to be affected by the rule, have input through a public perspective, have input through expertise in the field, and represent a variety of different interests. And so they provide the input and recommendations to the agency or to the board. Then with that information, rules are drafted or refined to go with various recommendations and information that was learned through the RAC process. Then those draft rules are filed with the Secretary of State, and notice is given to interested parties. So that's called the notice process, is giving notice out to the public, notice out to interested parties so that they know a rule is coming on a particular topic. And why that is important is because during the rulemaking process, the public has an opportunity to comment on those draft rules. And so they can provide written comments to HLO. Sometimes there's the opportunity to provide in-person comments, but there is a timeline that governs, and there is HLO should have set out a specific timeline, or it will once it does the notice, as to when that comment period ends. But during that time, up until that time ends, comments can be received from the public on those rules. Then after that, the board and the agency consider the public comments, and they discuss and determine what the final rule should be. So they consider what the public has said about those draft rules, and they finalize them. After the text is finalized, then the rules are filed with the Secretary of State, and it becomes a rule that governs. And so it's a very important process because it has a lot of power to govern licensees, to govern whoever is at stake in the rule. So just like statutes have power to govern over different people, also rules have that power. And so again, it's that very important process to go through, and getting that public comment and having a RAC involved are great ways to gather information for the rule to make it the best rule possible. So what's the purpose of a RAC? What's the purpose of your meeting today? So public involvement is one of the key purposes. Members of the RAC represent interests of persons and communities likely to be affected by the rule. Sammy had mentioned that there was a bill that passed in 2021 that was called House Bill 2993, and that included that not only individuals, persons who have an interest in the rule need to be included in the RAC, but also communities likely to be affected are also now included in the RAC. So that was a change just recently. So the RAC provides advice and comments on those draft rules or on the concepts to the board and the agency. The RAC provides recommendations and information that they can use for the fiscal impact statement, which we'll touch a little bit more on in a moment, which is an important step. And in addition, as Sammy said, they also can provide information on the equity statement. That is something also new with that new bill that passed. And some agencies look to RACs to provide information that they can use in that racial equity statement. And this RAC today is being held in a public meeting. That means that the public can attend and listen to your discussion and watch the video if it's recorded. They can watch it at a later time. So what are the basic requirements for conducting a public meeting for today's meeting? So first, to know, these are all things that HLO is taking care of. So again, this is just background information for your knowledge as to what happens with a public meeting, but nothing that you need to be concerned that HLO hasn't taken care of. They've done all of this. So they provide notice to the public of the meeting so that the public has the opportunity to listen in and attend. They provide access so that the public can attend either by phone or in person, depending on what the requirements are at the time for public involvement in person. Then also they provide access by persons with disabilities, making sure that the meeting is accessible to all people. The meeting, it has to be documented in a recording or minutes. And so that information also then can be made to the public, the minutes or the recording. And the official actions happen by vote during a public meeting. And that voting process is a transparent process. It happens during the public meeting. It can't happen behind closed doors. So that's another requirement of public meetings, so that the public knows what is going on at these meetings and how the agency is creating rules like you will be working on today, and what the agency's process is. So fiscal impact, we've talked a little bit about that. So as part of the notice for the rule filing, when the draft rules are filed with the Secretary of State, there's a requirement to have a fiscal impact statement. And the RAC needs to provide its recommendations on various things for that fiscal impact statement. So this is a very important part of the rulemaking RAC process. So today, HLO and the board will need your recommendations on whether the rule will have a fiscal impact. So that's one of the things you'll want to be thinking about as you go through the draft rules and considering the various issues today, is how will this impact the individuals? How will it have that financial impact? And you can note to Sammy or note to yourself until you get to the place on the agenda where you talk about the fiscal impact. But just be thinking about that. Make notes to yourself internally or to Sammy as to what that fiscal impact may be, so that that information can be considered. And as you're thinking about that, what is the extent of that fiscal impact, whether it's going to be minimal or a large fiscal impact, and who is it going to impact? Is it going to impact small businesses? Is it going to impact large businesses? Is it going to impact people who are out in the public in other ways, not necessarily affiliated with a small business or a large business? And so the HLO and the board will be looking for your recommendations on if the rule has a significant adverse effect or impact on small business, then what are the recommendations for mitigating the cost of compliance? So what are your thoughts on how that cost can be mitigated if there is an impact, a significant adverse impact on small businesses? So that information will be used for the fiscal impact statement and the notice, which has to be filed with the Secretary of State. And I'll just briefly comment on that new process that Sammy had mentioned in regards to the racial equity statement. So this is a new requirement that is now also required in the notice that's filed with the Secretary of State. The racial equity statement is a statement identifying how adoption of the rule will affect racial equity in this state. And so HLO and the board will be also asking you for information in relation to how different people in our state are going to be impacted. What is the effect on racial equity in the state? Is there one or is there not one? And if there is one, then let's identify what that is, who's going to be impacted. How the rule will have a fair or just, unbiased treatment on the people of different individuals in our state. Is it a fair rule? Does it have a disparate impact? That's what HLO will be looking for there. So we're going to briefly, now that we have gone through the rulemaking process and you have an idea of what that looks like, now that you know where that the authority comes from statute, and now that you have a little bit of information on public meetings and RAC, we're going to turn to what the governing statutes are for this field. And what we do here is we look at the statutes, because the statutes need to be your constant guidepost so that you can give advice to the board and HLO about rulemaking. So first, I thought we would go over the statute that governs getting a license in Oregon. So this is the statute here. It's 690365 is the number. And what it says is that the Health Licensing Office shall issue a license to perform services in a field of practice. Now, a field of practice is the field of electrolysis. There's also other fields of practice, but what you'll be dealing with today is the field of practice of electrology or electrolysis. And so this is a governing statute. And so that license, the applicant for the license has to show HLO that the applicant is at least 18 years old, has a high school diploma or equivalent education, has submitted evidence of completion of education and training, which is prescribed by the office by rule. So that's a key there, is that the rules get to establish what the education and training is, and then the applicant has to meet those and show that they have met those when they go through the application process. And the applicant has to have passed an examination that was approved, administered, or recognized by the office. And that again is a key there, that recognized by the office. So again, in rule, there has to be an examination that's approved, administered, or recognized by the office. Or I should say, if there is a examination that's approved, administered, or recognized by the office, then the applicant has to show that they did that examination and that they passed it. And then in addition, they have to pay the fees that that are required. And there is an actual fee statute in 676-576, which says when the HLO must collect fees. And so this is one of the areas where HLO has the authority to collect fees from people when there are applicants for licenses. So those are the basic requirements for a license in this field. There's also in the electrology statutes something called a temporary license, and there's a specific statute on this as well. And a temporary license is a written authorization, or it's a license, written authorization, issued under a different statute, 690-365, or a different section of that statute, I should say. That temporarily authorizes the holder to perform services in a field of practice or to operate a facility. But I think that what you'll be focusing on today is the licensing to operate in a field of practice. So there's a specific statute out there that says there is such thing as a temporary license. It temporarily authorizes a holder to perform such services. And then in 690-365B, the office may issue a temporary, and I think that should be 2B. Sorry about that. Or maybe that's 1B. I'll find that out. I apologize. 690-365, a certain subsection in there says that the office may issue a temporary license to perform services in a field of practice as prescribed by office rule. And why that's important is, again, that this is the temporary license is something that is created in rule. And so HLO has that authority to put it in rule, and that's where you guys come in during your RAC process to develop those rules on temporary licenses. There's another statute which also talks about the duration of the temporary license. And basically what that says is that the duration of the temporary license is established in rule. And so you will have the ability to weigh in on how long that temporary license should last. And then the rules will set for the actual time limit, and that's what will govern how long the temporary license lasts. We do know that it has to be temporary, but the exact length of temporary is something that's established in rule. Other statutes talk about the requirements for curriculum and education. Education and training for an electrolysis license is established in rule. There is a lot of deference to the agency given here, where the rulemaking is what governs these types of things. Like we just talked about, the temporary rule is something established, or I'm sorry, temporary license is established in rule. The curriculum and education is established by rule. So you see a lot of statutes in this area saying that it's the rules that create these things. That's again why it's so important to have you on the RAC today to get your expertise on these areas. So there's another statute that talks about that the office approves the education and training in this area. and that the office, in consultation with the board, must adopt rules setting forth the minimum standards of education and training. So we're not looking at maximum standards, we're looking at what a minimum standard of education and training is for an applicant coming into this field. What would make them proficient to be able to perform in this field of practice? What are those minimum standards of education and training that an individual must meet? And we'll put those forward in a rule. And then the office must approve a course in each field of practice. So where there are courses, then the office approves those courses, and that's done as well. So those are the statutes and the governing principles in relation to curriculum and education. There are statutes that talk about examinations for this field of practice and for fields of practice in general. For a license, the applicant must pass an examination. We saw that earlier, that the license statute says an applicant has to pass any examination that is required. The office selects the licensing examinations. So there may be a lot of different types of exams out there. There may be professional organizations that offer an exam, or national professional organizations that offer an exam, or private organizations that offer an exam. And depending on what is decided in rule, what HLO determines, that will be the governing exam that all applicants must pass. So the office gets to select it, and they do that through the rulemaking process. So the examination must be either approved, administered, or recognized by the office. So HLO does have the ability to administer its own exams. It also has the ability to adopt an outside exam as well. Examinations in the field of electrology must be offered twice yearly. So there is a statute that says how often these exams must be available and made to the public for applicants to take. And in this area, it's twice yearly. Rules governing retaking the examination are also set forward in rule. So if a person fails any part of an examination, then the office gets to determine by rule how that retake process will play out. And there's also a statute that says that the office can waive examinations as appropriate. So when there is an examination that is required, then the office can waive that examination when it is appropriate to do so. So there's a few statutes that comment on this examination area. And that's something that you may hit during your RAC process today, is examinations. So for renewal of a license, once a person has done all those licensing requirements and met them, and HLO has issued that license, then we think about how a person gets to renew that license so that they can maintain that license and keep it. So there is a statute that talks about this as well, and that's ORS 690385. So for a renewal, first the applicant or the licensee applicant must complete the renewal application, has to pay the fees. Again, there's a statute on that, and provide satisfactory evidence that the licensee completed any required continuing education credits on or before the license expiration date. So this statute does say that for renewal of a license, there needs to be continuing education credits. And let me say that differently. The statute says that when any continuing education requirements are required, then the applicant has to meet those requirements. So the rule process can establish when continuing education requirements are required. And then if the rules say that continuing education is required, then the applicant would have to meet those continuing education requirements in order to keep that license current and have it for the next period to renew that license. Safety and infection control. I'm not sure whether you will get to this in your RAC today, but there is a statute on safety and infection control, 690390, and this is basically what it looks like. It says that the standards established by the office, which again means that you get to do this in rule. It's a rule that governs, but there are certain things that it must require. So it must require that instruments that are used in a field of practice be sterilized in accordance with methods approved by the rules of the office. A practitioner working in a field of practice needs to be equipped with appropriate sterilization equipment, hot and cold running water, and a covered waste receptacle. So these are all things that, as the rules are created in the safety and infection control area, that they must also have. The rules must have these things. And a practitioner working in a field of practice has to have history cards for each client. So those are the basic things that the statute says must be required in rules on safety and infection. I apologize if my voice is getting a little weak here. I'm getting over a cold. But we are at the end of this presentation, so that actually works out quite nicely. So with all of that, thank you for your time and attention today. I wanted to see if anyone had any questions on anything that I went over, whether it's the RAC process, the rulemaking process, any of the statutes that you may be talking on rule issues today, any of those statutes that govern. Not seeing any hands raised or any questions. Well, thank you again. And it was nice to be a part of your RAC meeting. Sammy, did you have any questions or anything else that you'd like me to go over?
Nope, I think we're all good. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Sammy. I hope you all have a nice day.
Okay, following along on the agenda, I'm just going to quickly, there's 4 votes and recommendations that the Qualification Committee made to the Rules Advisory Committee. And then once this meeting is done, Smriti and I will commingle all the recommendations that will go to the board on September 12th, I believe. Yes, so the board will look at the rules, the draft rules that based on what the Qualification Committee said and what the Rules Advisory Committee say, and then they will go through and look through them, make changes, and then we'll send them through the process, Secretary of State and that. So the committee, the Qualification Committee approved a 600-hour curriculum. There was some review of 500-hour curriculum because some states have that, but the committee landed on 600 hours for a curriculum, which would be taught in private career schools, and then a 600-hour training program, which works similar to an apprenticeship. It's just not called an apprenticeship. That's under Bureau of Labor and Industry. And we'll go over these each in more detail. And then they approved, we've had struggles with the practical examination since we went away from the HLO administering them with proctors, because it was hard to get facilities and wasn't always enough candidates. So there was a whole host of reasons we moved away from that process and moved to having the practical at school level when the school closed. And one of the requirements for licensure, whether it doesn't matter what pathway, whether you're coming from Oregon or another state, is that you pass the written or practical exam. So it was a hindrance for people trying to come in, especially from other states, because that's the only means we have at this time. There's no practicals to get. So we actually filed a temporary rule being able to approve other exams as HLO deems appropriate on a case-by-case basis. So we're going to talk more about that, and we have some ideas on how that can flush out at the school level and at the training supervisor level. So we'll flush that out in rules and look at the objective tools that have already been created from when HLO administered the exam with proctors. And then the committee did touch on potentially having an Oregon Laws and Rules exam. That adds some work at the office level to create an exam, to maintain the exam. There would be an additional fee for people trying to get a license. So we're gonna have to talk through some of that. It will be part of the fiscal impact. And then, so yeah, so those were the 4 things, and we'll touch on each of them as we go through the rules. I think how I'm going to do it, and if you guys don't like this way, let me know. So I'm just going to start, I'm going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? I cannot see you. Okay. And then what?
Okay, to make it larger.
Yes. Let's try 150. How's that? Is that better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so how I'm gonna do this is, I can actually change things in real time, so you guys can actually see the language that you come up with. Sometimes I'll make notes in the margin where I might go back and massage the language. So we'll do it that way. That way you can actually see what the general concept that we're going to provide to the board. And then we'll kind of bounce back and forth between the curriculum, which is pretty much what it was before, but mostly the training program, if we need to look at that more in depth, or if we just want to go the broad stroke over the domains that are listed in rule. We'll see. We'll kind of see where it takes us. And you guys, at any time that you have questions, I know this can be confusing when, like, I'll run the mouse very quickly and people get a little dizzy sometimes. So don't be afraid to call out and say, you know, I'm lost, whatever. Okay, so we will start with the 600-hour. So the way it works is the curriculum and the training program are actually the same number of theory hours and the same number of procedures. It's just in a different model. So one's a school model, which is more traditional, student teacher type thing, and a supervisor trainee is more apprenticeship model in a facility doing day-to-day business on clients. So that's kind of the difference. But so if you think of it in terms as traditional school model would be a school, and apprenticeship model would be the training program. So I think what we want to start with, since it's new, is and since we don't have any schools, is the training program. So actually, let me read you that. So I'm just going to start with on page 1, where it talks about educational institution and the direct supervision. Sorry about that. I got a little ahead of myself. So what I have on the screen, definitions. So what we landed on for direct supervision means the supervisor is in view of a procedure to provide guidance and instruction to a temporary training license holder. One of the questions that came up after I drafted this was, so you would provide, so in view of the procedure would be, in my mind, traditional in the same room. But there could be a situation where maybe you're electronically monitoring them, like in this scenario, where the supervisor's in one location with the person on screen and the person providing the service is in another monitor. Would that be something? It would be different than what we normally do. That wouldn't be something that we've ever done before, but would that be something you would want to consider as a recommendation to the board? And anybody can just jump in or raise your hand is probably the easiest. Or if there's no comments, I'll give it a pause and Lacey?
This is Lacey Keeney. I wouldn't be opposed to that if it was on video. I just wouldn't want it to be done from, as long as it's within the same facility. So.
Okay. So it would need to be in the same location, but they could be in another room. And that's kind of how indirect supervision is they don't have to be in view of the procedure, but they have to be on the facility premises. So if you're saying they need to be on the facility premises, probably the electronic monitoring, which would imply that they wouldn't have to be on site. I guess you could say both, but still needs to be on site. Jamie, you have something to say?
Yeah, I see no problem with the written work done where the supervisor isn't right there. If they do the written work I believe we said that we would allow them to get the knowledge by, I know Dectro is giving a online course. I don't see why we would have to supervise that. But I do feel that when it comes to practical work, that the supervisor should be able to see what the person is doing. They might be able to be in the next room and constantly going back and forth every couple of minutes, or if the person being trained has a question, they can get to the supervisor immediately. But no, I don't like the idea that the person could be in another part of the building. I think the next room would be okay, or in the same room, but I don't agree that the supervisor could be any place. You know, the proximity to the person performing the procedures has to be really close.
Okay, so I think what I'm hearing you say is we wouldn't want to put like within 10 feet of the person. So probably the best would be just to say must be in view of the procedure and let them figure out what that looks like. They have to be on the same location. Otherwise we start getting into feet and is it the next room? Is it upstairs? So we really don't want to go to all that. Hi, Sheila. Yeah. Yes. You're on mute. Oh, okay. You know.
I think it has to be flexible enough to consider that some people might be doing online distance learning from home. The supervisor wouldn't be, you know, in their room or house or whatever to begin with. So I think it has to be flexible to consider the different ways people might be doing their theory. It might be with, you know, talking in the same room with their instructor or a teacher, but they could be in a different location totally. If it's, you know, for in order to be considered distance learning and self-study, it's the point of it is to be able to do something without before going to the site to do the practical training. So that's my concern about the way it's worded.
So this would be just when a procedure is being provided. Theory can be done, and it's actually noted in the training program curriculum and is it noted under the school? The theory can be done through online distance learning. This would just be procedural, hands-on client trainee.
Okay. Could that be included in the wording so that it's, you know, that it's talking about that part and not the other?
Well, it says procedure. I could make procedure clearer. Let me just highlight that. Maybe practical procedure.
Okay.
Does that make it a little clearer?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, great. Good. This is really good dialogue. Thank you. On number, is everybody okay with that? We move on. Oh, I can't see who. Seth, is that you? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I think it's important that, you know, with the digital environment that we're in, that we shift this. So I appreciate that was shifted or changed here, because I think a lot of folks can get as much detail with cameras on site that they may get in person. So you would be able to see a pretty detailed procedure on camera as you might be able to see it in person. It just depends on the technology that site has. So I like this expansion.
Okay, great.
And this is, oh, sorry.
This is Lacey Keeney. I would like to say that I do agree with Jamie Bloom, though. I think that the supervisor needs to be within immediate accessibility to the student, though. So if there is a problem or an issue or something going on where they need the supervisor there immediately, that the supervisor is within, you know, hollering distance or, you know, immediate accessibility. I mean, even if they're watching from video or whatever, they need to be immediately accessible to that student in case there's an issue or a problem for safety purposes.
This is Kate Kaufman. I defer to electrologists who knew more about the safety needs of having direct care, but if we're talking about equity statements as well, if somebody is wanting to see a supervisor who has specialization in treating Black and brown people or transgender people, your availability of supervisors is limited. And so you may want to see somebody in a different town or even a different state in order to get quality supervision. So that telehealth option would help with our equity work.
I don't think.
Jamie?
Hey, I understand what you said, but when a student is doing practical work, all right, I agree with Lacey that the supervision has to be immediately accessible. When we're doing the written work on Black, white, trans, anything like that, that's more or less taken care of in the written work. How the skin reacts, different skins react differently to different modalities and all of that. And that's part of the written work, but and that could be done online or whatever. But when a student is performing a procedure, the supervisor must be within immediate accessibility, because if they put in the needle in the wrong direction and cause a hematoma or or something, you can't do that being online with them. That's something you have to be in immediate accessibility to the procedure being done, because oh, she's bleeding. Well, if you're online, you're not going to be able to help this student with what she's just done. She's got to be able to, you've got to be, so if she screams help, you can be there. I have in my practice, not very often, but somebody who basically was so nervous that they hyperventilated. You can't help a person if you're online, but if you're in the next room or within screaming distance of the procedure, you could go in and help out, but you can't do that online. So I disagree with you. I think there are almost everything book learning wise that you can do online, and I'm all for it. But when it comes to the practical procedure, the proctor or the supervisor must be in immediate accessibility. And I liked your wording, Sammy, immediate accessibility. Thank you, Lacey. We'll get this together.
Kate, to your point, I think that this might get us there. A trainee can have more than one supervisor. So in order to try to get, if they wanted to get a more diverse group, people with different Fitzpatrick skin types, all different things, they could have, say, a supervisor in Portland and a supervisor in Eugene. So that does get us there in that context. So it doesn't have to be one single supervisor. It could be, they could have three. And because they're trying to get a variety of flavors, so to speak. But they would have to be immediately accessible. And I added that in. Supervisor means a supervisor immediately accessible in view of the practical procedure to provide guidance and instruction to the temporary training license holder. Does that get us there, Kate? Close?
I appreciate knowing that people can have multiple supervisors.
Great. Sheila, did you have something? Oh, your hand's just up. And Lacey?
Yeah, this is Lacey Keeney. So we are talking about having multiple supervisors for one student. I didn't realize that I thought that once they applied with the paperwork that it was for a specific supervisor for a specific student. I think my opinion is you really want to have someone who's got consistency with someone, and some of the stuff that Kate was talking about too is stuff that you really that's experience that you're going to gain too as you progress as an electrologist as well, especially if there's someone seeking for working with other different types of things. So I was just kind of confused about having more than one supervisor per student, because especially if the supervisor's having to collect hours and document the supervision, it might be kind of hard if you have more than one supervisor.
This is Sammy. We could go when we get down, and we're almost there to the training program. We can talk about that more in depth. Maybe we can make it clear that they have to work together. This is how it's written in body piercing. So if it was there, I put it in here, but definitely something for the committee to look at. Of course, when you and when Cerinthia provided her stuff, some of these things don't get in the curriculum. So that's why we have both types of meetings, so that we make sure we hit all the marks. But we can definitely go into that more in depth. But for body piercing, the reason they do it, just for knowledge, is sometimes you don't have a lot of people who want their tragus pierced. So you got to go outside of that specific facility. Like you'll have experts that do those types of piercings. So maybe it's not necessary in electrology. So that can be some. And if the group is torn, we can do a separate vote and just take both options to the board. So when we get down there, it's under 910. What's the number? 07, number 10. So I'm going to make a little note here. Jamie?
Oh, I'm unmuted. I would like you to highlight that number 10. I don't think with electrology, you can have more than one supervisor unless the two supervisors are working together. So like, just
Okay.
hypothetically, let's say there's a person that's coming to me, but Sheila's only a block away from me, and this particular day I can't be there. Sheila could come to my office, or this person could go to Sheila's office. Then I can see two different people. But with electrolysis, there's no need to, an electrologist basically works on the entire body, and to be licensed, you need to be able to work on the entire body. Now, I might have expertise in doing genitals, but anybody can do genitals. It's a hair follicle in the skin, and you treat it the same way. So there's really no need to go to another electrologist to teach you, because the person teaching you can take care of the situation. I don't know if I made myself clear or not.
Yeah, you did.
There's no
Seth,
reason to have two people.
Seth, did you have something?
I had an original question to the first one we were looking at, just around like if an incident were to happen, are supervisors physically stepping in and doing things on site to assist, or are they verbally assisting a student if there were to be an incident? And just curious if there needs to be physical stepping in by supervisors, or if, for example, if you were virtual, if somebody could verbally walk you through the steps to remedy something.
Yeah, I think that making it immediately accessible and hold on, I'm getting there. So it has to be another direct supervision and guidance that would, and we could say it if make it more clearer, that, hold on, actually under the actual supervision, the whole section. Give me 1 second here. So the supervisor has requirements, so you could make it clear if it's unclear. Where's that? Approved supervisor may supervise up to 4 trainees. Supervisor must provide direct supervision, exercise management. So are you saying that there may be a need to say, if there's a problem, the electrologist must be available to step in?
I was actually suggesting the opposite, that if they're just verbally giving instructions, that I enjoyed the fact that people could virtually have supervisors versus having to be in the same place on site. Just curious from folks in the room if you've physically had to step in, or if you could give that instruction verbally to somebody.
I see. Lacey?
So this is Lacey Keeney. To address Seth's question or answer it, is that, technically this is considered a medical procedure, and there are things that happen during these procedures or could happen during these procedures that could be an emergency situation. There's what's called the vasovagus syndrome, where somebody basically goes into shock and slide off the table. There are, as Jamie put it, hematomas. There are other things, and a lot of things really need to be demonstrated hands-on, like holding your probe and how to hold the probe holder and how to stretch the skin correctly and do things. But like a good example, like my practice, we do things under anesthetization where we use epinephrine, and something like that could cause tachycardia. I mean, so these are things that you need to be in the room. And there's other incidences that can happen, like I said, the vasovagus syndrome, where someone could basically just kind of pass out, slide off the table. And when you're a student in a student situation, you already have enough stress and enough things going on. And if an emergency happens, you need someone who's a qualified supervisor to be able to jump in, step in, and take control of the situation. Look at someone and go, you call 911, you do this, let's get the person on the table, let's take care of this person. And to remove that person from the equation and try to do this on an optical thing where you're somewhere else trying to manage the situation is just asking for a very, 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 very big medical disaster. And not only that, we have to carry malpractice insurance for this. And I could tell you right now, if my malpractice insurance found out that I was trying to supervise a trainee via video from somewhere that I was not able to stand in an emergency situation, I probably would not be able to get medical or get insurance coverage for something like that. So the liability of me not being on site and having a student have a medical emergency happen where I cannot jump in and take control, again, it's not only a big liability for me, but it's also a major liability for my student and my facility. And I just really think that it's bad news to try to put something on video that really has to be a hands-on procedure. Plus, the other thing that we're really trying to step away from is the degradation of our education and what we're teaching people. And when we take things out of physical hands and away from one-on-one physical contact with our students and who we're trying to teach, you lose and you get a degradation of training where people miss things. Like, for example, if I'm not sitting in a room with a student or looking at the student, I can't look at their machine and see where their settings are. If I see on a video that they're causing some blanching or something like that, I can't make an immediate adjustment and say, here's what's going on. There's this with the skin, that with skin. There's, dehydration problems or moisture gradiency problems where this or that needs to be changed. You really need to be present. And again, you have to remember, this is not like getting a haircut. This is a medical procedure where you can actually really physically hurt somebody if you do something wrong. So
Okay.
the chances for physically hurting somebody are pretty big. And that's one of the reasons why Jamie and I, who have a lot of experience with this, say that you really need to have somebody within hollering distance.
Great.
Okay,
I
let's
appreciate
make
the
sure
feedback.
everybody gets a chance. Kate, I think you were next, and then Sabina, and then Nicole.
I appreciate all of the concern, Lacey and Jamie. I'm thinking about the spirit of why we're here looking at adjustments of these rules, because we've had access issues. Like, yes, both your board and like even a therapist boards, we want to have quality education and quality care. But at this moment, we're in a crisis of having enough providers getting trained. And so we're actually looking in our rule making, we're like, how can we have the least restrictive rules so that the most innovation can happen? And I'm thinking about other ways that we're working on mitigating risk, in that where the training curriculum has already said you have to have direct supervision for the first 46 procedures of 3 different types of procedures. And then there's indirect supervision for the 230. So already we're like, you have to have direct supervision, and then it moves away from that. I'm wondering if we can allow for telehealth, even if it's not going to always be used, in case COVID happens again and we shut down, and you only, like if we write in, you only have in-person care, that shuts the school down because they can't flex to an online process. So I'm just trying to think about how can we make it most expansive for future contingency planning.
Sammy, you're on mute.
So I think I hear everybody. Some people are saying definitely need to be on site in hollering distance of somebody in order to ensure that patient safety, consumer safety, which is why we're here, is at the forefront. And then there's a few people that think that telehealth and some way integrating that, still having the patient safety. So when we get down to that, let's have a little more discussion about it. I can always take both options to the board and they can decide there. So I think Sabine is next.
Hi, I just wanted to weigh in here because I think that there is a way that we can kind of get the best of both worlds. So I just want to say that regarding what Kate was saying about being able to reach out to other people with different expertise, I find that very valuable and important. And I think that that should definitely be on the table. For instance, if I wanted to focus on pre-surgical electrology and I wanted to go down to Eugene and see if I could learn from Lacey a little bit, that would be really hard for me to take my supervisor in Portland with me, because then I would have to take her away from her practice for a day, and she would be coming down basically just to twiddle her thumbs while Lacey shows me everything. So in that situation, I think that it would make a lot of sense for me to be able to expand my training by going down and working with Lacey for a second, without having to tote along the person who is my official supervisor with me. So what I'd like to propose that I think will kind of ameliorate this issue for folks is, so I was looking at the materials that you sent out prior to this meeting, and I'm looking at the document titled Electrology Training Program 01-2023.pdf, and it says, you may now commence your electrology training program ETP under the supervision of your approved supervisor. Supervisor's full name. And what I think makes sense is to have that supervisor, whoever is your official supervisor, be the one taking the ultimate responsibility for a trainee's education and verifying that the education is proceeding correctly and that students are in fact doing the work that they say they're doing and getting quality training. But also, I think that it makes sense to allow other supervisors to sign off for certain hours in a student's training. So for instance, if I wanted to go down to Eugene and learn from Lacey, if I went down for 2 days and did however many procedures, Lacey could sign off on those specific procedures, those specific days, and then send an email back to my main supervisor in Portland saying, Sabina did X hours, I signed it off on her spreadsheet, and she worked on X skills. And that way, and for instance, if we were going to try and do a telehealth thing, like if I wanted to get training from somebody in another state and I wasn't able to go to Alabama or wherever, I could have my official supervisor be in the building and immediately available while I was working on a client, but I could be receiving training virtually from somebody else in another state who perhaps has more experience working on people of color or people with vitiligo or whatever issue I'm trying to pursue additional training in. And so I think that would be a good means for me to be getting education from people with different expertise, but also having somebody present for every procedure, whether it be my official supervisor who is named in that acceptance letter, or somebody else whose facility I am visiting. So either way, there would be an electrologist on site available to step in case I screw something up. But also that allows for a broader, a broader span of knowledge that I can pursue. I'm not just limited to the specialties of whoever I'm officially training under. Jamie looks like she's very excited to respond to me.
All right, can you hear me? Pat, Sammy, you're muted.
Jamie, it's really important that everybody gets an opportunity, and I think Nicole was in line next.
All right.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that I do agree with Sabina that you should be able to have several different supervisors because, for instance, if you're working with one and yes, they're not teaching you exactly what you are wanting to be taught, it would be helpful to have the option to see somebody else. I also do agree that the supervisor should be within distance to help somebody. As somebody that just graduated school, I couldn't imagine being in a room doing a procedure without somebody standing and helping me immediately if there was a problem. That's all.
Okay, Jamie.
All right. Hey, Sabina, I don't know who else got in on this. I've been an electrologist for a long time. Yes, we need more electrologists in Oregon, but nobody's going to be doing genital work when they're learning how to do this. All of us, all over Portland, all over Oregon, we all do skins, different shades of skin color. We all, I can't say all, but we do, we're very connected with the LGBTQ community. If you're a supervisor and you're training these people, I don't want anybody to go out of state because I don't know what their qualifications are to teach you what to do. Now, I know Lacey's in Eugene. I know Sheila's up here. I know Audrey is around here. I've seen their work. And I would have no problem if somebody, after we've done the preliminary knowledge and they've had at least 3/4 of the hours they need, to go to another supervisor who I know is good. If I'm putting my name on telling the state that this person knows what they're doing and can get a license, I'm not going to sign off on any electrologist who supervises that I don't know. And if you're not an electrologist, you really don't know what we're doing. We are part of the medical health care facilities. There's lots of things people have to know about the skin, about, all right, I don't want to rant and rave,
Okay.
but I don't think these people that are not electrologists really understand the technique used. And I see Lacey shaking her head. There's a reason we don't have enough electrologists. This is not an easy profession. You've got to learn the technique first. And the technique, whether I'm putting that needle into somebody's chin or somebody's arm or toes or any place else, the technique of inserting the needle is the same. The current that you need is different on the area of the body. And anybody that's going to be a supervisor should know this. And I'm really uptight about, like Seth saying, oh, we can do this by telecommunicating. Telecommunicating is great once the person has gone, I would say, 3/4 of the way into their training. Now, the other thing, practical, if somebody comes to me for training, I'm going to charge them money. If
Okay,
they
Jamie.
go to
Jamie.
somebody else, who's going to pay for the time? All
Jamie,
right,
we're not getting into the business practice and fees and how much it's going to cost. That I will try to report in a fiscal impact, and it is going to be difficult. I think that several people have, and we understand that, are very adamant about needing one supervisor and on-site training. And I think we respect everybody's opinion, and that's important. Because remember, this community is likely to be affected, so everybody may be affected differently by these rules. So we need to respect that. And again, I think we definitely see that there are sides of the road where maybe we're going to take a vote or separately give these issues to the board individually rather than in a full, one big vote, because it looks like we've definitely got some. But I want to keep the conversation moving. But let's just quickly, about 1 minute, if we could do 1 minute for Lacey, actually Sheila, Lacey, Seth, Kate. Okay, so Lacey, Sheila, Seth, Kate, and let's limit it to about 1 minute.
This is Lacey Keeney. So I will keep this real short and sweet. Just so I want to put this out there, I would never in a million years take someone who's learning and is unlicensed and is in a training situation and have them work in the genital area on somebody until after they're licensed and have experience. I've hired people from out of the top electrology schools out of California, and even then they work side by side with me in an extended advanced training before they go into working in and doing genital for vaginoplasty or phalloplasty, because these are so so critical that they are right for the health of the transgender person. And me being a transgender woman myself, I understand that. And this is a situation where you're not going to come right out of getting your license and immediately jump right into the middle of doing medical electrology work for OHSU or any of the top surgeons. You need to spend time with someone and master that skill. These are the minimum requirements necessary to get your license, not go out and start doing stuff that can really, really, really hurt someone or really affect someone's procedure of getting a vagina or a phallus or something like that. So this is something where after you get your license, you're going to spend some time with someone like myself or Jamie, really honing your skills to be able to do stuff like that. So, and yes, we do have a shortage. And the reason we have a shortage is because this is serious business. So thank you.
So there may be a way, and I'm just making a note here, that it sounds like possibly you wouldn't allow a trainee to ever do genital work, but I think that we can talk about that more later. Sheila, go ahead.
Well, if we're going to talk about it later, maybe I could just wait, but I really think that having no experience working in the genital area is a disadvantage coming out with your license. Then you kind of have to pick it up on your own. And I think it would be somewhat comforting maybe to have someone by you to guide you, at least broach the subject during your training. I mean, a lot of us older folks like me, we never thought about doing that. Never had an experience, never was suggested, even though my first person I ever worked on was transgender, but we just weren't working on pre-surgery clearance. But I don't think we should limit the types of procedures we do to any particular area, say it's face or you can't do genitals. I mean, it's not written that way now. It's just, it's open. So I think it depends on the person's, everybody's comfort level, I guess. But I can see both sides of it, but that's all I got to say right now.
Okay, Seth.
Thanks. Yeah, I just want to respond to Jamie that I'm not here to advocate for telehealth. I'm here to advocate for the expansion of access to this so we get more folks in the field. And so I fully defer to you both as the professionals in this field, and I will just be here asking curious questions. And it sounds like we've heard a lot of those responses that have given us some more information. So I just want to clarify that I come here from a place of curiosity and expansion and equity lens, and wasn't advocating necessarily for telehealth because your information clarified for me that wouldn't work for safety. So when I ask those questions, it's out of a place of curiosity, not out of a place of a personal opinion or advocate process of like, I think I know best. I defer to you all for the professional expertise, but I will be here challenging us all to think about how do we get to this next step? How do we expand? Because keeping the same rules may not get us there. And so I hope that you all can see that where I'm coming from.
Thanks, Seth. Where was I think we had Kate, but it looks like she is not. Sabina, did you have something?
I just wanted to throw out there that going down and doing training with Lacey was just an example. And I think that we're getting caught up on whether or not certain things should be part of the student training program or not. I just want to go back to the issue of having multiple supervisors. And I just want to say, is there any reason that somebody like I believe Jamie was saying, she knows who she would trust and who she would be willing to sign off on a student getting training from. Is there any reason not to let the student supervisor make that decision and be willing to allow a student to get training hours with another supervisor or not per their judgment and their understanding of how that electrologist works and whether that's somebody who they would be comfortable kind of co-signing on work and training with?
Okay, so I'm just gonna kind of, I think we actually covered a lot of just the training program in general, just under the one definition of direct supervision. So good job, everyone. We got a lot of that taken care of. I think that maybe we could land on this. Midwives have language where you can have multiple supervisors, but one of them is determined as the main person who's actually providing the guidance, collecting all the information. So we could put in rule that you can have multiple supervisors, but one person is designated, how does it say it, as the primary midwife. So we could say as the primary electrologist. So that way we still get to having multiple supervisors, which goes to Kate and Sabina's comments. And then it also goes to, I think, Jamie and Lacey's comments and Sabina's, where you are going to be working in tandem with these people, and that the primary electrologist is really overseeing the practice and what the other supervisors are doing. Would that be something that you guys are interested in?
I think that makes a lot of sense.
Okay, so I'm just gonna make a note of that. One thing about having multiple programs is I've written hundreds of rules for hundreds of professions, so I can grab things from other boards. And what that would look like is documentation, the client record. I can go into more detail in the rule, but so if everybody can agree, if there's a primary midwife, electrologist, if there's multiple supervisors, everyone's okay with that. We would be limiting it to for any type of direct patient care. It would be the supervisor needs to be on site, not saying 10 feet, but just saying on site at the facility location. And then, and I'm just going to bring this up. I don't think you want to limit procedures to everything but non-genital. You want to allow people to have some flexibility to do everything. Would that be accurate?
How are we supposed to vote?
Well, that's a good question. I guess I was trying to get a straw poll if we need to vote on this separately or all together. So let's just do this. Let's vote separately. And so I'll just call these out. So if someone make the motion that multiple supervisors would be okay, as long as one is designated as the primary electrologist. Somebody can make that motion, someone can second. And then I'll call the roll.
Motion as Sammy stated.
I'll second.
I'll second it.
Okay, and then I'll call the roll. Jamie Bloom,
Jamie, yes.
Sheila,
Sheila, yes.
Lacey,
No.
Seth,
Yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Sabina,
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Carla, Carla, do you have a vote? Can you
I was
give your?
muted, yes.
Thank you. Nancy's not on, correct, April? And Amy. Did I already call Amy?
Amy, yes.
Okay, great. So motion passes. I will keep record of that. The next one is that the supervisor must be on site, but could be, and we're going to leave this flexible, over electronic monitoring, but needs to be on site in case there's an emergency. So, excuse me? Yes, for any type of procedure being performed. That would be the term, definition of direct supervision. Jamie?
All right, I want to say we changed that to say that the supervisor has to be in immediate proximity.
You're right.
I don't want somebody to be someplace in the building.
You're
They
right.
have to be so that they could be immediately accessible in case something happens.
Okay, so let me just go ahead and say the the definition, I apologize that I already drafted because I should have went back up. Direct supervision means a supervisor immediately accessible and in view of the practical procedure to provide guidance and instruction to the temporary training licensee. So if somebody can make a motion to that and then second, and then I'll call the roll.
I'm Jamie Bloom. I make a motion that definitions number 2, direct supervision means a supervisor is immediately accessible and in view of the practical procedure to provide guidance and instruction to the temporary trainee license holder.
I, Lacey Keeney, second that.
Thank you, Lisa. I'll call the roll. Jamie Bloom,
Jamie, yes.
Sheila,
Sheila, yes.
Lacey,
Lacey, yes.
Seth,
That, yes.
Kate,
Yes.
Sabina,
Yes.
Nicole,
Yes.
Carla,
Carla, yes.
Nancy, Amy.
Amy, yes.
I'm just taking some notes, sorry. Okay, and then the last, is there any other ones? Hold on, let me go back down. Okay, so I think that's it. We wouldn't, I don't think we need to vote on the limiting it to only non-genital since it's already written that way. We don't need to, we're not changing much on the draft. So is everybody okay with all of that? Okay, I am gonna call for a 10-minute recess. Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
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 Okay, I'm gonna mute you and turn you off camera and I will be back in 10 minutes.